expected to have a treaty this year.
Still, a major Western fear remained. Soviet conventional forces were superior to those of NATO.
And in my nightmares, I never dream about a nuclear war. I don't believe it. What I worry about is a good old massive conventional war, because that's what the general know how to fight. You know, they know how to fight with tanks and airplanes. They don't know how to fight with nuclear weapons, and that's why they don't fight. I don't know any other system, any other weapon in the history of humanity that has scared people so much that they haven't gone to war for political purposes. They have gone to war, without physical war. They fought with ideologically, they fought with proxies in Angola, or in the Middle East, they fought through communist parties, whatever. But they haven't gone to war.
If you say we want to do away with the intermediate nuclear forces, for instance, as we're approaching now, the pressures for doing something in those areas in which you have no restrictions and no cuts to increase there is going to be very powerful. Already people are talking about putting air-launched missiles on B-52s to make up in Europe for the removal of the Pershing IIs and the ground-launched cruise missiles.
Nuclear weapons in Europe have been stabilizing. They have persuaded the Soviet leaders that there's a high cost to any kind of an adventure. And indeed, there has been no adventure in Europe for a very, very long time, perhaps since the Berlin Wall. To remove that equation is to give the Soviet Union an inherent advantage of geography and manpower. That, in my view, would lead us back to pre-World War I instabilities.
I think it would make deterrence more stable and make it better from our standpoint. The reason being that what would be involved would be the reduction of some 1,600 warheads on the Soviet side and the reduction of some 300 to 400 on our side. In other words, there would be a far greater reduction on the Soviet side than on our side, and I think the military situation would thereby be improved. Beyond that, of course, it is necessary for us to maintain our commitment that an attack upon one NATO country in the NATO area would be an attack upon all.
In time, despite misgivings, NATO leaders dropped their objections to the zero option.
As most of you know, we are currently engaged in highly sensitive negotiations with the Soviets that could lead to an historic arms reduction treaty on intermediate-range missiles, or as we say, INF. This matter was also discussed last week with the NATO foreign ministers in Iceland. I have received Secretary Shultz's report on his NATO meeting, and I'm pleased to tell you that we and our allies have reached full consensus on our negotiating position.
The new mood is one of guarded optimism. An INF agreement appears to be within reach. Yet at the same time, the Reagan administration, accusing the Soviets of cheating, says the United States will no longer abide by the SALT II agreement. Several key factors still cast shadows on the possibilities of a world free from the specter of nuclear war.
When the president last November decided to break out of the SALT II treaty and start equipping additional bombers with cruise missiles in excess of the numbers permitted under the SALT II treaty, by the end of this year, we will probably have added more warheads just by trashing the SALT II treaty than we're reducing under the INF treaty. So, you know, we're not really making much progress. The real ball game is in strategic nuclear warfare and eliminating the big missiles, the big submarines, and so on.
And so the arms race continues. Reagan administration officials say they hope to follow the forthcoming European treaty with joint reductions in ICBMs, long-range rockets the superpowers now aim at each other. However, the Soviets still say such reductions must be tied to an American agreement not to deploy Star Wars.
The Soviet Union assumes that we're well ahead of them in all this laser and particle beam and kinetic kill capability, all those technologies. And they're not about to agree to reduce, as the president suggested, 50% of their nuclear arsenal, 50% of their warheads, while we deploy SDI. I mean, they may be dumb, but they're not stupid. And I think until SDI is on the bargaining table, you're not going to get serious reductions in these big, long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles.
New doubts have surfaced about the technical feasibility of strategic defense. In April 1987, the American Physical Society released a report on directed energy weapons, the advanced technologies of Star Wars.
These technologies fall far short of what is needed for them to be effective.
The study, conducted by 15 expert military, industrial, and university physicists, concluded that 10 years of further research would be necessary just to determine whether directed energy weapons are even technically feasible. The Soviet Union, the report added, can be expected to use that time to make their missiles less vulnerable.
The Soviet Union, as a countermeasure, will do everything that is obvious and probably some things that are not obvious. They will harden their boosters. That is, they will protect them against these weapons. They will multiply the weapons. They will add decoys. They will build defenses to attack our satellite constellations.
If you read the American Physical Society report, you'll see that the chances of such a system ever being workable are very slim indeed.
I think it's too soon to say whether, at the end of the day, we will be able to develop an effective and a cost-effective and a survivable strategic defense. I hope we will. But it's in the essence of the research program that you don't know until you've done the research. And too many people have made their minds up already without waiting for the results.
Another growing area of concern about the stability of deterrence lies in perceived Soviet conventional superiority over the United States and its NATO allies.
In terms of the overall alliance, the Soviets have a 2-to-1 advantage with tanks. They have a 3-to-1 advantage with artillery tubes. They have a 2-to-1 advantage with helicopters. They have a dominant position in Central Europe. There is a definite relationship between conventional non-nuclear weaknesses on the Western side and our dependence on nuclear weapons. To those who simply say, let's get rid of nuclear weapons, we have to ask, as Winston Churchill said in his last speech to the American Congress, what then will take the place of nuclear weapons in preserving the peace?
Can we, in the last analysis, continue to control nuclear weapons? Can deterrence, an idea that has kept the peace for 40 years, keep it in the future?
My own judgment is that nuclear weapons can't be uninvented. They're going to continue to exist, and they will probably continue to exist, almost certainly continue to exist in large numbers for many decades.
I've had many conversations like this with some of even your former secretaries of defense who would really like to disinvent the nuclear bomb. They would really prefer the pre-1945 world. But let me ask you something. Do you have any example of deterrence that has successfully prevented war before 1945?
I like to think, and I think the evidence suggests, that with nuclear weapons in sizable numbers in the United States and the Soviet Union, deterrence is likely to continue, and the sobering effect of the possession of nuclear weapons on the parties that have them is likely to continue, and we can look forward to another 40 years of peace.
I find that strategic deterrence is pretty stable and pretty robust. While one cannot prove that nuclear deterrence has been the prime source for the absence of war in the past 40 years, it is likely that it has made its contribution to this, of discouraging not only nuclear attack, but also conventional war between the superpowers. I see no reason why that condition should fundamentally change in the next 40 years.
Every institutional arrangement eventually breaks down. In the 1890s, people thought there would be peace forever based on the balance of power. Even as late as 1914, the leaders of Europe thought peace was guaranteed when they were only a few weeks away from World War I. So you cannot count on a theory of nuclear deterrence operating forever.
If you just continue to add new missile systems and new warheads, and the destructive capacity becomes much greater and greater every year, I think that at some point, you have to bear in mind there are 2 men in the world who can put the lamp out for 4.5 billion people any second of any day. They can do it because one of them's gone mad. They can do it in a moment of pique. They can do it for any reason they want to, because they're genuinely concerned that they're about to be attacked. And when you consider all those possibilities, you have to assume that throughout history, at some point when man has built weapons, they have ultimately been used. We still think exactly the way warriors were thinking 1,000 years ago about weapons that can end civilization and will end civilization if man doesn't come to his senses soon.
The United States and the Soviet Union remain bitter ideological rivals for world power, deeply fearful of each other. While these adversaries decide their next deterrent moves, perhaps in space, the world watches nervously from the sidelines. Yet, the common interests of the United States and the Soviet Union, and indeed of all humanity, lie in controlling the almost unimaginable power of nuclear weapons. The United States and the Soviet Union may together write another chapter of superpower peace based on a new nuclear standoff. Perhaps the next generation will give primary importance to the solution of international conflicts in ways totally removed from the institutions of war.
Of Deterrence was produced by KCTS Seattle, which is solely responsible for its content. Major funding for the Knife Edge of Deterrence was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding was provided by this station and other public television stations, and by the Bullitt Foundation, the Rockefeller Family and Associates, and the Joyce Mertz Gilmore Foundation.
For a transcript of this program, send $4 to PTV Publications, Post Office Box 701, Kent, Ohio, 44240.